30 Iranian gunboats. That is the number that formed a cordon around a United States nuclear carrier strike group in recent weeks. 18 nautical miles out, closing from 3 separate vectors in coordinated formation. Weapons systems visible, engines at tactical speed. USS Lincoln was ready. The carrier's phalanx CIWS had targeting solution on every surface contact. 2 Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers, each carrying 96 VLS cells loaded with SM-2 interceptors, had rails elevated and engagement envelopes calculated. 6 FA-18 Super Hornets sat on the catapult deck with weapons-free authorization. Every system on the strike group had a firing solution within the first 20 minutes. For 6 hours, not a single round was expended. The boats circled Lincoln. They photographed her. They ran their fuel down to tactical minimums. And at 0940 local time, every one of them turned around and returned to Qeshm Island. No Iranian sailor was harmed. No American missile left its tube. No jet fuel was burned in a combat pass. And by the time those boats docked, the United States Navy had already completed a targeting package on an asset Iran thought was invisible. The Pentagon won't say what happened on the record. The Doctrine says everything. To understand what Lincoln's strike group commander was actually doing for those 6 hours, you need to start with a number that has nothing to do with weapons. $50,000. That is the approximate acquisition cost of an IRGC Siraj-class fast attack craft, the primary surface platform in Iran's asymmetric naval doctrine. Fiberglass hull, outboard engine pack, RPG launchers, a 12.7mm heavy machine gun on a pintle mount, sometimes a Chinese-manufactured anti-ship missile tube bolted to the foredeck. $50,000. The cost of a mid-range pickup truck in Los Angeles. Iran operates several hundred of them. They are built domestically, crewed by Revolutionary Guard naval forces, and designed with one specific operational assumption embedded in every hull: that any American response to them will cost more than they do. Run the math on the American side. An SM-2 Block 3A surface-to-air interceptor costs $2.4 million per round. That is the official, unclassified per-unit figure. Standard Aegis engagement doctrine for multiple fast-moving surface threats in a saturated electronic environment calls for a minimum of 2 interceptors per target to ensure a high probability engagement, not 1. 2. That redundancy is built into Aegis doctrine because single-shot engagements against maneuvering targets in degraded electromagnetic environments have a kill probability significantly below 100%. 2 shots per target is not pessimism. It is engineering. 30 boats, 2 interceptors each, 60 SM-2s, $144 million. Expended in under 4 minutes. And when what Lincoln's commander was running at 0340 was a different calculation entirely. Not how to respond to the swarm. What the swarm was actually for. Because here is the detail the cost equation alone does not capture. If the objective of 30 boats circling a carrier is simply to drain the American magazine, the operation peaks at the moment of the first engagement. The boats achieve their maximum strategic value the second the SM-2s start flying, because at that point, the noise, the electromagnetic activity, the entire defensive orientation of the strike group snaps into crisis posture. And the question Lincoln's strike group commander was asking at 0340 was, what is that crisis posture supposed to distract from? I spent time going through the after-action doctrine literature on Iranian naval deception operations, and one pattern appears consistently across every major IRGC naval exercise cataloged since 2010. Surface distractions and subsurface repositioning are not parallel operations. They are synchronized. The surface element creates the acoustic environment and the sensor focus. The subsurface element uses both. The first complication Lincoln's commander was working with in those early minutes was a tactical picture that was not clean. When 30 fast attack craft sortie simultaneously from Qeshm Island in the pre-dawn hours and converge on a single carrier from 3 axes, the electronic environment becomes extremely dense. IRGC fast boats run civilian marine radios, GPS jammers, and acoustic decoys as standard equipment in coordinated swarm operations. The first 15 to 20 minutes of any such engagement, the ESM picture, electronic support measures, looks like noise. Radar tracks split and merge, contact counts fluctuate, speed and heading data come in degraded. Lincoln's Combat Information Center was processing somewhere between 30 and 40 surface contacts with intermittent track quality. The fire control solution was ready, but the picture carried genuine ambiguity about civilian contacts in the engagement envelope. The Strait of Hormuz moves substantial commercial traffic, even in periods of elevated tension. A fiberglass hull at speed looks similar to a fishing dhow on some radar frequencies. The commander had solution. He did not have certainty. He chose patience. And in that decision, made in the first minutes of the standoff, he preserved the one condition that made everything that followed possible. At 0412, Lincoln's towed array sonar detected an acoustic transient 3 miles southwest of the main boat cluster. Not a surface contact, a submerged one. Let us look at what an acoustic transient in that position, at that moment, actually means. Iran operates the Ghadir-class submarine, a domestically produced coastal midget submarine, approximately 29 meters in length, displacing approximately 120 tons submerged. It is not a sophisticated platform by any external standard. It carries two 533mm torpedo tubes. It can deploy mines from those tubes in addition to conventional torpedoes. Its acoustic signature, under normal conditions, is detectable at useful range by a properly positioned passive sonar array. Under normal conditions do not include 30 IRGC fast attack craft running full power gasoline, outboard motors at tactical speed in a dense maneuvering cluster 2 miles away. A single outboard motor at attack speed produces approximately 140 decibels of broadband acoustic noise across the frequency spectrum, not narrowband. Broadband, meaning the acoustic energy overlaps directly with the narrowband propeller tonals and machinery frequencies that passive sonar uses to classify and track submarine contacts. Multiply 140 decibels by 30 sources. The acoustic environment in the 5-mile radius around that boat cluster was, from a passive sonar perspective, the approximate equivalent of placing a carrier strike group inside a marine engine testing facility and asking the operators to identify a single violin. Iran had just created the perfect acoustic cover for a submarine repositioning. Whether this was a deliberately synchronized operation or a combination of tactics that Iran had run enough times to know function together is, from Lincoln's perspective, operationally irrelevant. The effect is identical. Here is the counterintuitive logic. This is the engine of the entire 6-hour engagement. Put yourself in the Ghadir captain's position for a moment. You have 30 surface assets running engines above you, generating exactly the acoustic mask you need. The carrier has not fired. No SM-2s. No helicopters hunting you. No active sonar pinging the water column. From your position, the operation is working exactly as intended. The mask is holding. You continue your repositioning toward your assigned firing solution angle. You do not know you are being tracked through the very cover you are using. Now run the counterfactual. If Lincoln had fired at 0350, if the SM-2S had cleared the surface picture in under 4 minutes, the 30 boat's engines go silent. The acoustic environment clears. Every passive sonar array in the battle group has clean water to work with. The Ghadir, repositioning under the engine noise it believed was protecting it, suddenly loses its cover at the worst possible moment. The submarine captain sees a cleared surface environment and a battle group in active combat posture. He aborts. He goes deep. He sprints for Iranian territorial water. By not firing, Lincoln preserved the acoustic mask the Ghadir was relying on. And while the Ghadir's captain navigated through what he believed was a successful deception, Lincoln's MH-60R, Seahawk helicopters, and towed array operators were building a track on him. Type imposition in the comments if this changes how you read Iran's fast boat strategy, because this is the equation most analysts never write down. Not what the surface threat costs, but what the surface threat reveals. Subscribe to NavyStrikeforce. We don't celebrate weapons. We calculate whether they work. Now here is where the operation got complicated. At 0412, Lincoln had a tentative sonar contact. Tentative, not confirmed, not classified. The track quality was insufficient for positive submarine identification. The contact could be biologics. It could be a surface wake artifact rebounding off a thermal layer. It could be machinery noise from one of the larger IRGC vessels transiting above. Lincoln's ASW coordinator needed time to build confidence in the classification. Time the surface standoff was providing. And here is something about this operation that does not sit cleanly in the analytical narrative. The 6-hour patience Lincoln maintained was not purely a product of doctrine. It was partly a product of communications, friction working, in this case, in the Navy's favor. Between 0340 and 0500, there were at least 3 separate engagement authorization requests moving through the chain, from the strike group commander to CENTCOM forward, from CENTCOM forward to CENTCOM main, and upward from there. Each returned with a hold order. Not a denial. A hold. The doctrine said, wait. The chain of command said, wait. But Lincoln's commander did not know at 0400 that CENTCOM's hold was based on separate intelligence indicating the surface display was likely a deception operation. He was running his own calculation. Those were 2 separate decisions arriving at the same conclusion through entirely different reasoning. That matters, because it means the outcome depended on an alignment between tactical analysis and strategic intelligence collection that did not have to exist. This time it did. The next time, it may not. At 0630, Lincoln's track on the Ghadir went intermittent. The submarine had descended through a thermocline layer, a temperature boundary between water masses of different densities that bends and scatters acoustic waves in ways that can make a tracked submarine contact effectively invisible to a passive array positioned above the boundary. The towed array contact degraded from possible submarine to possible biologics in under 4 minutes. For 47 minutes, Lincoln did not know where the Ghadir was. In those 47 minutes, Lincoln's ASW coordinator faced the core choice that defines submarine prosecution in acoustically complex environments. Break the passive approach. Go active. Transmit a sonar pulse into the contact zone, which would guarantee reacquisition of the contact, but would also announce to the Ghadir captain that he was being tracked, almost certainly causing him to abort his repositioning and sprint for shallow Iranian water. Or hold passive, hold patience, and wait for the submarine to emerge from the thermal layer on its own. Going active would find the submarine. It would also lose it permanently. They held passive. At 0717, the contact reacquired on a bearing consistent with the previously tracked course. The Ghadir had passed through the thermal layer and continued its repositioning run. The geometry was still intact. The captain still had no indication of compromise. This is where the doctrine gets interesting, and why it has implications beyond this specific engagement. For most of the past 2 decades, the dominant critique of American naval strategy in the Persian Gulf has been that the United States consistently fights the war Iran wants. High visibility, high-cost responses to provocations that drain resources, generate favorable headlines for Tehran, and leave the underlying strategic balance unchanged. Every engagement of an IRGC boat becomes a story about American firepower and Iranian persistence. The cost of the interceptors becomes the story. The magazine depletion becomes the story. Iran absorbs the tactical loss and wins the strategic narrative. What cost imposition? Default, the doctrine Lincoln was running, represents is a deliberate inversion of that logic. The engagement the enemy forces you to have is not the engagement you choose. The engagement you choose is the one built on information the enemy thought it was hiding. Let them run their boats and burn their fuel, and believe the acoustic mask is holding, while you construct a targeting package on the asset they thought was invisible. That is a fundamental shift in how the Navy thinks about restraint. Not restraint as reluctance, restraint as a weapon. The take that will probably generate disagreement. The Lincoln decision was strategically correct, and it was made possible by a specific condition that does not reliably exist in American military operations. A strike group commander given enough room to be counterintuitive without real-time override from above the tactical level. The documented cases where U.S. naval operations in the Gulf have produced strategically damaging outcomes. The 1988 USS Vincennes shootdown of Iran, Air 655, the 2016 sailor detention in the Northern Gulf, consistently involve command pressure from above the tactical level. ROE ambiguity applied from above the tactical level, or political urgency overriding the judgment of the officer who can actually see the engagement picture. Lincoln worked because someone gave a commander 6 hours of space to be correct. That is the rarest resource in contested naval operations. Rarer than SM, 2 interceptors. Rarer than acoustic intelligence. And if the Doctrine depends on it, the Doctrine has a supply problem that no procurement budget can solve. Think about what that commander was holding at 0340. 30 boats at 18 miles. ROE threshold satisfied. 6 FA-18S on the deck. Every system in the strike group had a firing solution. The defensible decision, the one every exercise, every evaluation board, every post-incident review would validate, was to fire. What would you have done in that combat information center with 30 Iranian boats circling your ship at 0340 in the morning and a tentative sonar contact that might be a submarine or might be biologics? Drop restraint in the comments. Because the answer to that question is not academic. It is the question the next strike group commander in that strait is going to face. By 0930, Lincoln's passive collection had produced 3 intelligence products that did not exist at 0340. First, a geofix on the Ghadir accurate to within 2 nautical miles, with a 6-hour course reconstruction and depth profile derived entirely from passive acoustic data. Sufficient for a Tomahawk anti-ship missile targeting solution. Sufficient for handoff to an attack submarine if one was in position. Sufficient for an MH-60R Seahawk to put ordnance over the contact in under 12 minutes from launch authorization. Second, a complete acoustic library for this specific Ghadir hull, propeller cavitation signature, machinery tonal frequencies, the acoustic fingerprint this submarine generates at different speeds, depths, and headings. That library is now permanent, filed with naval intelligence, distributed to every P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft, every embarked Seahawk, every attack submarine operating in 5th Fleet waters. The next time this hull moves in the Strait of Hormuz, the clock on tracking it begins the moment it clears the breakwater at Bandar Abbas. Third, a behavioral map of how 30 IRGC fast attack craft execute a coordinated carrier encirclement. The timing intervals of their vector assignments, the communications pattern frequency, the fuel consumption rate, which tells you the precise operational radius of the swarm, and the fuel state threshold at which the boats must turn around. That threshold is now known. The moment the boats reverse is not random. It is predictable. And Lincoln can now predict it within the first 40 minutes of the next swarm deployment. Here is the cost accounting for 6 hours of patience. Iran, $1.5 million of fast attack craft, approximately 8,000 gallons of fuel, roughly 200 personnel hours of operational tempo, boats returned intact, 0 losses. United States, 0 rounds expended, 0 magazine depletion, a geofix on a Ghadir-class submarine, a permanent acoustic library on a specific hull, A behavioral predictability map for IRGC swarm coordination. A Tomahawk targeting package filed, updated by satellite, accessible to every 5th Fleet Strike asset within 15 minutes. Subscribe to NavyStrikeforce, because what we are about to show you in the next episode is what that targeting package actually authorizes, and why the Ghadir's captain may not know it exists. The cost ratio is not 144 million to 1.5 million. It is 0 to everything Iran revealed. This is not a fair fight. It is not designed to be. Iran's asymmetric naval doctrine was built on a specific simulation of American behavior. A simulation that modeled a U.S. Navy, which, when confronted with a surface swarm at close range, fires, drains the magazine, broadcasts the engagement across every spectrum, demonstrates the cost equation working in Tehran's favor. It is a simulation that ran successfully, repeatedly, against the rules of engagement that governed American naval behavior for most of the post-Gulf War period. The simulation was accurate. It just stopped being accurate. The Lincoln incident ran a different calculation. And Iran's naval planners now face a genuinely difficult problem, one that has no clean tactical solution. How do you use acoustic cover to reposition a submarine when the target of your acoustic deception has learned to preserve the acoustic environment instead of clearing it? How do you design a surface swarm as a strategic distraction when the surface swarm may be producing targeting data on your subsurface assets rather than draining the adversary's interceptor inventory? How do you build a deception operation around a predicted American response when the American response has changed? At 0940, the boats turned around. From Keshem Island's operational picture, it looked like a successful pressure operation. 30 vessels, 6 hours on station, carrier held at 18 nautical miles, no Iranian losses, a win on the tactical ledger. The Ghadir returned to port at approximately 1400 local, its crew having completed the repositioning run without, from their perspective, any indication of compromise. The targeting package Lincoln filed with CENTCOM was updated with the submarine's estimated current position within 3 hours of its return to berth. One detail that stuck with me, going through the available analysis on this engagement: the cognitive patience Lincoln's commander maintained across those 6 hours is not something that develops in a standard training cycle. The Navy has been running what it calls structured patience exercises within 5th Fleet and Pacific Fleet since at least the early part of this decade. Drills specifically designed to build the capacity to hold a valid firing solution without executing it while a more complete strategic picture develops. That is a trained behavior, not a natural one. Under operational stress, with 30 boats at 18 miles and every system armed and waiting, the human default is to act on the solution you have. The trained response is to wait for the solution you want. The distance between those two responses in the Lincoln engagement was a Ghadir-class submarine, geofixed, acoustically cataloged, and filed in a Tomahawk targeting package. The equation changes when the variables change. Iran changed the variables when they added subsurface coordination to surface swarm operations. Lincoln changed the equation when it refused to clear the acoustic environment that was protecting the thing it was hunting. Here is the open question. Iran's naval doctrine has always rested on one foundational assumption: that American restraint is a weakness, that the political friction, the diplomatic complexity, the legal architecture around firing in a contested maritime environment creates a constraint that can be exploited, that if you put enough pressure on a system that prefers not to act, it will either act expensively or back down embarrassingly. The Lincoln incident introduces a third option. Don't act on the surface threat. Act on the intelligence the surface threat generates. Let the enemy's deception operation become your collection platform. Let them run their boats and believe the mask is holding, while you do the work you actually came to do. The question nobody has answered yet: has Iran already worked out what happened in those 6 hours? Because if Tehran's analysts have reconstructed the acoustic timeline of that standoff, if they understand that 30 fast attack craft produced not a magazine drain, but an intelligence windfall. Then, the next evolution of IRGC naval doctrine has to address a problem that does not have a straightforward answer. You cannot use acoustic cover if the adversary has learned to preserve acoustic cover instead of clearing it. You cannot synchronize surface distraction and subsurface repositioning if the surface distraction is being used to track the subsurface asset you thought it was hiding. We spent several episodes showing you Iran's layered denial strategy in the Strait, the mines, the missile batteries, the fast boat doctrine, the coastal defense architecture. What the Lincoln engagement demonstrates is that the United States has found the layer beneath the surface layer. The question is, what Iran builds underneath that? Will this doctrine survive the next confrontation, or does political pressure override tactical patience the next time 30 boats appear at 18 miles? Comment yes if you think the Navy holds the restraint. Comment no if you think the next incident ends with SM-2s in the water. Subscribe to NavyStrikeforce, because the calculation we just showed you, not the weapon that fires, but the weapon that waits, is the one that determines who controls Hormuz next. We don't worship the machine, we worship the equation.